Now, in this week's Let's Talk Some Star Wars video, I want to mainly discuss this recent announcement from Bob Iger, CEO of Disney of course, that Star Wars is going to slow down or be more careful about volume and timing when it comes to Star Wars movies. I also want to get into, and hear your thoughts after the video, why it is that Marvel, for the past 10 years now, has been cranking out an average of 2 movies a year, and very few people ever talk about MCU fatigue, or the need for them to slow down. Yet after just 4 movies in a few years, the Star Wars franchise is already pumping the brakes. And before I go on here, I'm just going to quickly read Bob Iger's comments in case you haven't heard them or read them yourself. I made the timing decision, and as I look back, I think the mistake that I made, I take the blame, was a little too much too fast. You can expect some slowdown, but that doesn't mean we're not going to make films. JJ is busy making 9. We have creative entities, including Benioff and Weiss from Game of Thrones, who are developing sagas of their own, which we haven't been specific about. And we are just at the point now where we're going to start making decisions about what comes next after JJ's. But I think we're going to be a little bit more careful about volume and timing, and the buck stops here on that. And yeah, I know one of the first things people are going to want to point out here is that Iger doesn't mention Rian Johnson's trilogy, and they'll take that as proof that it has been cancelled, when in reality it could just as easily be that he just didn't happen to mention it here. That being said though, I honestly don't think it'll ever happen. I don't think that Rian Johnson will get his trilogy. If they are slowing down, I don't know that they'll have 2 major projects in production, and by the fact that Iger doesn't mention the Johnson trilogy, but does mention the one brought to us by the Game of Thrones guys, well, let's just say that's not a good sign for Johnson's trilogy. And here's how you need to look at it to understand it from Disney's perspective, keeping in mind that their main goal of course is to make as much money as possible off of Star Wars. Now, if they press on with the Rian Johnson trilogy, there will be a large group of fans who will not only not go and see the movies, but loudly and vehemently protest them. However, if they cancel his trilogy and make the excuse that, that thanks to their own decision to slow things down, RJ's trilogy just doesn't have a place anymore and has to be put on hold, those fans who wanted to see it will still of course be disappointed, but I highly doubt they'll protest or boycott. And those fans who wouldn't have gone to see RJ's trilogy will now likely go and see whatever they're getting instead. In other words, it's a simple numbers game. It's all about how to make the most people go and watch the movies and how Disney can make the most money from Star Wars. And as much as I love Star Wars, and as much as I respect my fellow fans, even those who absolutely disagree with me about The Last Jedi, if you think modern day Star Wars is about artistic freedom and lending a platform to writers or directors to try new and different ideas, then you need to pull your head out of you-know-where and come to terms with reality. Star Wars is a business, and like all businesses, it survives because customers are eager and willing to spend money on its products. So when you make a product, or in this case a movie, that a sizable percentage of your fan base disliked, you don't carry on with that approach. And what I really think Bob Iger is saying here, or admitting to, is that they have no idea what to do with Star Wars right now to make that happen. They don't know how to appease a large percentage of their customer base. And I'm sure it's probably utterly confusing for the execs at Disney to try and figure out what Star Wars fans want, how so many people could complain about The Last Jedi, a movie that subverts expectations and was different from any other Star Wars movie, and then Solo, a movie about one of the most beloved characters at the core of the whole franchise, a movie that they probably thought all Star Wars fans would love, utterly flops. So what I think Iger means when he says in his statement that we're at the point now where we're going to start making decisions about what comes after JJ's, and he's of course referring to episode 9, it isn't that they haven't had a plan all along, though at times it does feel that way. It's just that they realize whatever plan they did come up with hasn't been all that great or well thought out and needs to be scrapped because it's just not going to work. And the truth is they need someone at the helm with a deep love, appreciation, and understanding of Star Wars to form a long-term plan and a goal for the entire franchise. And not to be harsh, but if you sat Kathleen Kennedy down alone in a room and asked her what her vision for the future of Star Wars is, I highly doubt she'd be able to give you a very good, detailed, and well thought out answer. She'd likely give you the runaround, and some generic answers about staying true to George Lucas's vision and so on, which is about all I've ever really heard out of her about Star Wars. I highly doubt she herself could come up with specific plans for certain characters or storylines or movies or new directions for the franchise, and that's not me trying to call her intelligence into question. It's me calling into question her love and understanding of the franchise she helms. And as I've said before, I would gladly take on Kathleen Kennedy in a game of Star Wars trivia. Though that's not to say that just having Star Wars knowledge qualifies someone to be president of Lucasfilm, though it's a pretty important prerequisite. What would really be fun though is going back in time a little over a decade ago and sitting Marvel's Kevin Feige down alone in a room and asking him, what's your vision for a shared Marvel universe? Because you wouldn't get the runaround. You'd probably get him talking for hours on end about what eventually would become the MCU, which is arguably the most impressive feat in the history of film. And why it is so successful is not complicated, not at all. It's about having a good, well thought out, long-term plan from someone who understands the property. As I see it, and others have made this analogy before, but Star Wars or Marvel or even DC or any of these other big name franchises are like Ferraris. They obviously have amazing potential, but they have to be driven properly and by someone who knows what they're doing to reach that potential. You can take the exact same car and put an experienced race car driver behind the wheel, and you can take a kid who got his license yesterday and put them behind the wheel, and you're obviously going to get drastically different results out of that car. And I think with someone else behind the wheel of Lucasfilm, we'd be getting drastically different results. I also think there is another important factor here. Fans of Star Wars don't want Star Wars to be like Marvel. They want it to be, I guess you could say, something rarer and more special. They want new Star Wars to feel like an event, not the next part of an ever-continuing linear story like Marvel has been. And I don't mean that as a diss against Marvel, because I and clearly many others love the MCU. I'm just saying I think most Star Wars fans actually prefer less Star Wars, as odd as that may sound. And as this poll I posted the other day begins to suggest, not very many people want Star Wars to adopt the 2 or more movie a year approach like Marvel has, and only about a quarter of the total people who voted seem happy with the current 1 movie a year approach as is. And most people, over a third actually, want to follow the formula of the originals and the prequels, and only have 1 movie every 3 years. There's also this remark, which was the top rated comment, from M. Lewis, who doesn't care how long it takes to make good movies. He just wants good movies, even if that means waiting 4 or more years in between them. And that's the thing about Star Wars fans, who all too often get accused of hating Star Wars because they're not shy about criticizing it. It's not that they hate it, not at all. It's that they want and, dare I say, demand perfection from the franchise. They're almost like the parent who expects too much from their kids and pushes them way too hard. But they're obviously not doing it because they hate their kids. They're doing it because they want the absolute best for them, but can't understand there are some standards that are just set too high. And yes, as someone who has been very critical of The Last Jedi, I can admit that my expectations in general are too high for Star Wars movies, though it's not the reason why I dislike The Last Jedi. I and many others have some major issues with many aspects of that movie that go well beyond what we'd hoped for or expected. That tends to just be an excuse people who love The Last Jedi use to defend it against those who don't. Anyway, even though I am one of those fans who feels like if you're going to make a Star Wars movie, you need to go the extra mile or don't even bother, I will forgive them if the movie isn't absolutely perfect. As long as the end result is still good and feels like Star Wars, I'm going to be happy. For example, there are certainly problems that I could point out with both Rogue One and Solo, but I still very much enjoyed both those movies. I also thought, for the most part, The Force Awakens is good for what it needed to be, that being a reintroduction to Star Wars. Though, as I've said before, I was one of those fans who didn't need a reintroduction per se, and so for me, I didn't enjoy it quite as much, but I can certainly still recognize why many fans, especially more casual fans, really love that movie. Then, of course, on the other side of the fence in this debate, you have those fans who will defend everything Star Wars just because it's Star Wars. They're like those parents who think their kids can do no wrong and should be immune to criticism. And don't get me wrong here, I do understand your desire to defend Star Wars, something you love dearly, and you take it personally when someone attacks it. But if you're not willing to criticize, then those making these movies will never be able to know how to continually improve upon them. Because no matter how much you love The Last Jedi, there are objective mistakes made in that movie. One example being Phasma is proceeding over the execution of Finn and Rose. Then the Raddus hits the Supremacy, and suddenly, a few scenes later, she's re-entering the hangar bay with a squad of troopers. So in other words, the merciless Captain Phasma woke up first, saw that Finn and Rose might still be alive, and she went for troopers and came back. And then instead of just killing them when she woke up, she went off and got a squad of troopers and risked that Finn and Rose might wake up and escape while she was away. That, like it or not, is a mistake. And it's okay to acknowledge that mistake, even if you loved the movie. It's okay to say it without feeling like you're admitting defeat somehow or betraying your fandom. It lets the filmmakers know that you're going to call them out when they make an error, which is a good thing if you want the movies to continually improve and not regress in terms of quality. The standard for a good Star Wars movie should not just be that it's called Star Wars. And even though I can criticize The Last Jedi all day, I can still say good things about it, like visually, it's a very impressive movie. In closing here, and not to completely contradict myself when I said earlier that Disney only cares about making money, but they really do need someone at the helm of Star Wars who doesn't care about any of that. They need someone who loves Star Wars and can find a way to appease a vast majority of the fandom, and who understands what's best for it going forward. Because if they can do that, the money part will just naturally happen. I again look at Kevin Feige, who runs the MCU. The man loves what he does. He loves it. Just watch any interview he's ever done, and you'll see exactly what I mean. And as they say, if you do what you love, the money will follow. And it's clear that Lucasfilm needs to find someone with that same type of love for Star Wars and amazing vision to run the show for them. Because if they do, the money and the fans will follow. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about the current state of the Star Wars franchise. Are you happy that it's going to be slowing down? And why do you think it is that Marvel can have so much success with their 2 or more movie a year approach, but that apparently won't work for Star Wars? So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.